Welcome back, everybody. It is the Working Brother back at you with another talk yet again. We're here with two guests. This time we've got Matt Ehret and Xoaquin Flores, who you may or may not know, either and or. Do either of you want to introduce yourself? You want to go first, Xoaquin, from the dark?
I'm not very good with introductions, but I'm happy to be on the show. I'm XF, Xoaquin Flores. I don't know what else to say, but
I am Matthew. Yep, I am Matthew Ehret. I'm Ehret. But I'm happy to also be here to talk.
Excellent. We've got two happy campers here with us talking. For some of us, it is early in the morning. For Matt, it is late in the afternoon, maybe even night. We've got a bunch of interesting topics. I can't help but start with the thing that is on everyone's mind, especially considering I've got a Canadian and an American here. How do you guys feel about this? Where is it? There it is. No? Did it go? There it is. Trump and Canada.
It's missing Greenland.
It is missing Greenland, but this one we're just discussing Canada for now. Do you feel like this is likely?
Is it likely? I don't know about statistical probability in this case, but I'm not neither for nor against it. It really depends on other variables for me to decide whether I'm okay with this or not. But it's definitely forcing some disruptive conversations, which I enjoy. Yeah, it could be possible. The world, I mean, the way I see it right now, the world's going through a major systemic breakdown, and when the shockwave hits, things are going to get crazy, like crazy beyond belief. People can't even imagine how crazy things are going to get when the system really like hits that full-blown shockwave and the spiral really hyper accelerates. At which point, things that today we think are impossible or improbable, even according to the trends of the past few decades, get turned inside out. So who knows? But I fear that this is possibly also a trap to make America integrate into, or to make America more Canadian than Canada to be more American in the long run, which is a concern I have. Like a bait switch.
Our resident Californication man, how do you feel, Xoaquin? Do you think Canada can become America? Or do you think, like Matt is saying, that it is more likely that America will become Canadian?
You know, as we speak, man, there's something like 90% of the Canadian population has accumulated within 100 miles of the U.S. border, and action must be taken now.
That's hilarious. For those who are watching and don't know what Xoaquin is referring to, the entire Canadian population, like 95%, lives, as he said, within 100 kilometers of the U.S. border, which would sound startling for some Americans who don't know that. But yeah, that's an embarrassing part of our heritage.
And there's more to it. There's only one road that connects Canada east to west, and it's within that 100 kilometer range from the border. So strategically, taking over Canada would be easier than taking over the Baja Peninsula, I think.
I think like the bigger question first is like, is Canada in control of Canada right now? Like, has Canada been in, what does that mean? And has Canada been in control of Canada for the past, decades, centuries?
I think we've got, this is kind of why I wanted to have you both on, because I know that you can jive in one symphony of very interesting sounds that may not go along at first glance, but then you hear them in tune and in rhythm, and you've realized that it is all making sense. Matt, you've been saying that, you know, Canada is not free and is occupied by the British Crown and, you know, those secret forces in London. So why don't you want to give us some background to that?
What you just said is true. Canada has a foreign power managing it, which doesn't care about Canadians or Americans. And just like Americans have a foreign power controlling it that doesn't really care about Americans or Canadians. But it's the same thing, and it's located in the very same thing that the founding fathers of the United States broke away from and fought a revolution against. And it's the same Roman patrician families that ran the Roman Empire. It's the same structures that rebrand themselves every once in a while. As far as cult agencies that are transgenerational, that interface with intelligence and banking, and that exert influence over the world. And Canada is still run by the Privy Council, is still run by these City of London directed institutions that never allowed for this piece of property, this real estate, to be independent. And we've been used as a political pawn within a great game for over 250 years, I would say longer even, run by Jesuits and Anglican Gnostic intelligence networks.
Hold on, Matt. We haven't even gotten past the 10-minute mark. We can't get into all these like weird words that you're using. By the way, everybody who's new here, hi, welcome. This is a comedy show. Nothing we say has anything to do with reality. I might have forgotten to say that. It's the fourth time I say it today. We did a lot of recording today before this one, but the point is, Jesuits, Canada. What are you talking about?
It is what it is. It's that's what ran Canada before the American Revolution, as far as what exerted influence in controlling the political dynamics after Colbert launched his development of New France. They mapped out a bunch of native bands, gave them languages, created new sacred myths for them, utilized and weaponized as many of the native bands as they could. They did the same thing for as far as infiltrating different Christian groups. And they never left. It's still a major power in Quebec, and that interfaced very closely with the Anglican intelligence apparatus that ran the British Empire. And together they worked to subdue the population and to keep it underdeveloped, since Canada became the hub of the United Empire loyalists that wanted to remain loyal to the British Empire, and were given territories after the 7 Years' War in Canada. That's why I speak English and I was born in Canada, is because of the United Empire loyalists. And, they've been using Canada as a wedge at different times to prevent U.S.-Russian friendship, which nearly happened on an economic basis during the 19th century and a couple of times in the 20th century. And at different times to just destabilize the United States through the control of banking intelligence and especially terrorist agencies that are groomed in little cults and communes, whether in Ontario or whether in the Freemasonic networks that created the Scottish Rite intelligence hub of Montreal and Toronto during the Civil War, that launched, Booth, John Wilkes Booth, to go and kill Lincoln from Montreal, and that were doing terrorist operations against Lincoln during the Civil War, or that killed JFK. That were centered in Montreal through the Permendix Corporation that still exists in the World Trade Center building in Square Victoria at Montreal to this very day. It's got a name change, but it's the same institution that was sort of an assassination bureau. And so that's Canada. So Joaquin was right. It's like, is Canada Canadian? It's like, no. So what are you even talking about when we're talking about taking it over? Or what is it, right?
Liberating it, freeing Canada.
Well, that would be good. That would be good if that's what's going to happen. Yeah.
I was talking to John Bosnich, and he was saying he was welcoming. He's there in Canada now, and he was welcoming Trump's liberation of Canada. But we'll get into that with him another time. I wanted to get Hawkins' take on. So wait, if Matt is telling me here that Canada is occupied, and that Canada needs to fight against these forces. Are these the same forces by any chance that Trump is fighting against?
They're very similar. I think they're related, but I wouldn't want to like think about it in black and white, but there's most of these forces will, break over to the side of pragmatism. It's not like a fight to the death. For some, it has been, if they're overly entrenched in a particular way of doing things that isn't compatible with, the way that the U.S. is reorganizing itself. But you can see with certain of these oligarchs, for example, like Musk and others, even Bezos, and even some in the press look like they can change their tune about certain things. So it's an inside fight, but it's like most of the combatants are non-combatants. They're fence sitters. You might call them gray hats, so to speak, and they are not going to trade some set of beliefs about the way the world should be run if it's going to cost them running the world. They're going to rethink how the world is organized. So yeah, it's very difficult for the U.S. to maintain its 800 plus military bases around the world, and it's difficult to base American power based upon the present global economic or financial architecture, more properly. And everyone talks about the reorganization of this and how that works. Well, that boils down to the nature of money and like what money is. We're not going down that hole. I know that that's not your question, but it boils down to questions like this. So there are going to be like large sections of the collective West, the oligarchy, that get on board with the new direction, But it is a fight. I mean, it's not like people just go with the flow. I mean, the outcomes of these, for many observers, may not have been foregone, and they would have been rather firm in their position and even opposing, not just Trump, but opposing a cold, sober realization that the United States cannot be the one that positions itself as the money printing machine that supports its own military industrial complex that then creates like a closed or exclusive buyers club called the international community, and then that's supposed to act as a sort of guarantor of a type of gunboat diplomacy around the world to force open markets, to create guaranteed winners among certain U.S., British, French, German, etc. companies, corporations. So, your so-called multinationals or your transnational corporations. So the globalists. So we're not talking about like a mortal fight between every globalist and every patriot. I know there's someone probably with like a poster of that in their room, but reality is more fucked up. So it's more entangled. Reality is all squishy and intermeshed. So I think there's almost more danger in what Trump is doing with trying to balance the inherent class antagonisms that exist within MAGA, like the inherent class antagonisms that exist within the U.S. population. Like if your policies, economic, geopolitical, aren't creating win-win for the population, then you're gonna, Republicans that with any brand are gonna lose big in midterm elections. I mean, the whole thing can go south if they don't have a real economic recovery in the United States. So in some ways, like the Canadian thing and other of these things can also serve among their primary and secondary tasks. They can also serve as distractions from very important socioeconomic issues that are unresolved in the United States. I mean, it's strange, not strange, but one could say like, wow, why in the fuck are we talking about Canada when we haven't made right with the people that lost their homes from 2007, 2008, the too big to fail, So it's kind of like compounding problems if they're going to take this stuff and start doing infrastructure development, or if they're going to take this stuff and start building roads and rail, there are good signs about this. I heard them talk at length. I heard Trump talking at length about having power for production areas be localized so that every place had its own source of energy. That goes in the direction of decentralization, and it opens up opportunities for these different interconnected nodes of production and distribution to have more control exerted by those who live around it locally. So yeah, there are some opportunities for localism and decentralization, but it all boils down to like which way things go with this fight within the populist movement in the U.S. Like, are they going to be just, wheat papered, plastered over with slogans and promises? Or are we, in other words, we're seeing a dismantling of USAID, we're seeing a dismantling of the National Endowment for Democracy. We're finding out how much media and how much stuff, Hollywood, foreign political movements were under the control of these American-based and British-based globalists. So
yeah,
you you jumped the gun. I was gonna pop that up. You posted it just before we started recording. The NED has officially been defunded by Trump, at least for now. But as I was talking with George Andrago in my earlier recording today, which will be out sooner or later, might be out before or after this one, but we were discussing that one of the subscribers sent in a meme where he was suggesting that all this USAID cleansing could just be kabuki theater to get some ex-AID in there in the future under a new brand name. How do you guys feel about that? Are you still with me?
I think that there's a relationship between the philosophy and the applied outcomes that is different. And I want to just mention about when a person interacts with media. So when you look at the projects that were funded through even YouTube channels and different information projects, public education projects that were funded by USAID and NED, what you find is that they needed to be subsidized. In other words, like if you actually analyze the content, it's often boring. So because it's functioning in a universe that it doesn't have a market mechanism to correct, like, is this shit fucking interesting? Do people really want to see this? So there's a limit to exploiting algorithms or being privileged by YouTube. So I think when you look at how people engage with authenticity and the way that, new media has been growing, the system, the elites are definitely looking at ways that to manage the message and to control it, or to encourage some messages and discourage others. But I think increasingly you'll find that they'll be using various different platforms and market mechanisms, monetizations and stuff on an individual pro rata basis, rather than big government grants where you don't have a market function. You basically, the way it works now with USAID is that you get these college interns that don't have any practical experience. They get the position because they interned for a while, and then they might hire consultants, or they might hire media or messaging experts and stuff, but they're making decisions by committee, and those committee-based decisions aren't the content creator who actually is no, I'm hitting my tens, I've got 10,000 followers, I'm getting 1,000 likes per video, I'm getting 100 comments per video, people that are actually assessing their trends. So I think that the attacks on the defunding the National Endowment for Democracy and defunding USAID is more about a posture that the United States has to take in order to be agreement capable. Right now, the U.S. is non-agreement capable because you elect a president, you elect a government, and then there's a deep state that's running these programs in the background without any checks or accounting done at the level of the Treasury. They just stamp out the checks, even for terrorist groups, even for groups on that you can't get funding. There's like a 6-month delay on those. So it's like crazy that they just issue these checks, and that makes the United States non-agreement capable. So all these things that you're seeing, like, oh, shutting down, and then you're hearing about the so-called opposition in Georgia drying up. You're hearing of all these issues, all these statements being issued from these different NGOs, like how important it is to call your senator to, fight back against Trump's, whatever it is, to save USAID. Well, you can see what the whole point was. So when people from Trump's side or the US side are going to be talking to the Russians about the resolution of Ukraine and probably Gaza and probably a number of other issues, because they're all connected, even Taiwan will come up. And in setting up for these talks, like you have the United States is offering a series of, it's not even goodwill. It's actually like, preparing their own portfolio for a conversation to show that they're clean. Like they're cleaning up their own assets and how their records are done and what they can present. Let's say, imagine if it was that type of a deal. Well, this is a deal that's a commitment that we're going to make an agreement, and we're not going to have a $1 trillion funded media intelligence operation running unaccountable to elected government, contrary to those agreements. You can't make peace with Russia and have a final settlement on Ukraine if you're going to still have fucking George Soros trying to fund Navalny or some shit. I mean, so this is it's all very much connected.
Did you see that? George Soros's statement on Trump?
No.
He was like, I just came across it last night. Yeah, he was like, he was like Trump's egoism or egotistical maniac narcissism or something is so huge that that's what's driving him, and it's out of control, and it got worse since he became president. I might find the clip while you guys are talking. Let me shift gears a bit and give Matt the podium. You sent this along. Now available, Revenge of the Mystery Cults, a trilogy. Do you want to tell us about these awakening mystery cults?
Yeah, sure. I originally was beginning to reframe a lot of my analysis around some of the considerations of of how occultism and Freemasonic type of operations have been shaping all of our collective history. And I got into this in a more serious way when I began working on the whole Hidden Hand Behind UFO film series. We've done 3 episodes so far. And so I started extending a lot of that research with the considerations that we're living in a giant sort of magic show run by a bunch of modern sorcerers trying to create a new revival of the ancient pagan mystery cults. I sort of got into that analysis in that direction, and I found myself having to reevaluate things I'd been taking for granted, like what is the Roundtable movement, the CFR, as far as their purpose, origin, and mandate. What about the Fabian Society? How about the Society for Psychical Research, which has a huge influence over parapsychological considerations in the United States and government policy, including the UFO new sacred lore that they're trying to bring into being right now. So these books kind of just manifested in the course of about a year's worth of research. And I really now so those are available on my website. One tackles more the geopolitical considerations of these mystery cults. The other one tackles the scientific So one is like sort of mind, body, and soul. So the first one is dealing with geopolitical material considerations, from the ancient times to the present. The second one is more the mind, the intellect, and how our scientific traditions were subverted by this Rosicrucian priesthood. That deals with more like Isaac Newton as a fraud, who had handlers, Charles Darwin, a geopolitical fraud who was managed by Huxley and part of the Invisible College of the Royal Society. It also has Nikola Tesla and Elon Musk on the cover, who I also treat at some length as two other frauds, who appear to be just synthetic cutouts who had a lot of.
We actually mentioned we actually mentioned that in the Breaking the Sacred Cows episode that we did with Tesla.
Yeah.
I've in the meantime I found this clip in the background here. Let me see if I can play this.
President Trump.
No, not here.
Is a con man.
Pause. The con man, President Trump. Let me put this on the big screen here for you guys.
And the ultimate narcissist who wants the world to revolve around him. When his fantasy of becoming president came true, his narcissism developed a pathological dimension.
That's it. That's the whole quote that we've got, and he just reminds me of the Serbian protesters who are like checking their notes. What am I supposed to say? You know, like it seems like somebody's feeding him his lines. It doesn't seem like he really feels that. Reaction? What were you gonna say?
I said it's rich coming from him, you know. I mean, it's just bizarre. This is like an unrepentant Nazi collaborator. It's just bizarre to talk about his ego and the narcissism and the world revolving. Like in so many interviews, Soros has talked about creating the world in the image that he wants and getting, seeing his vision implemented and all this stuff. It's like, so it's just someone else's vision. So fucking what? So it's just rich coming from him.
That's real Freudian projection, eh? Like this is a guy who's been playing with the fate of nations, and trying to like reconstruct all of humanity around his tastes and whimsies for the right to die and legal drugs for everybody, and that's his like purpose for his open, just society that he's trying to bring to being and turn the world inside out. So yeah, what a humble guy. But just to like put a bow on it, and you were asking me about the trilogy. So that's the second one. The third one is more on the spiritual, cultural dynamic in the battle. That one deals with Edgar Allan Poe's Final Mystery and the battles that Poe was exposing in his work, and Beethoven too. I've got several chapters that also like showcases the more creative aspect of the epistemological battle, as far as the Theosophists waged it, the Rosicrucian revival of Bulwer Lytton, the Golden Dawn that came out of that process, and that generated all of these cults and subcults that misshaped so much of our 20th and 21st centuries. So that's that story, that third one, and what Joaquin had said about the considerations of the crisis-ridden elite in the United States that recognizes that they've hit a bit of a wall and need to readjust their calculus and how they think about managing their relations with other nations. I think that's a serious one. The U.S. is on the cusp of a major disintegration financially, and if it was like 15 years ago and Russia and China hadn't been able to build themselves up and to create a viable, multipolar economic architecture outside of the total dominance of the U.S., then one could say that they could have blown out the system, and everybody would be in the controlled demolition together as we collectively went through this total Armageddon-like cataclysm, out of which fire, sort of a new alchemical, working, could be introduced to generate a brave new world dystopia for everybody. But that's no longer the case. We're not 15 years ago. You actually have now a much more strong alternative system and cultural matrix that's much more protected and built up, which, in the West, if they're going to be able to the oligarchy is not just going to give up. No, they're not going to just go away and become humble. So they have to do a little bit of self-reflection, some cleaning out of excess bureaucracy and mediocrity that we've like built into our system now for decades, in order just to compete, just to stay relevant. So I see sort of some of the retooling and the cutting this bureaucracy. I don't see it from necessarily a heroic light, but I see it as from a utilitarian standpoint of like needing to stay relevant and to try to figure out like how they're going to build back some productive ethic that they've lost over several generations. And like Joaquin was saying, to create a little bit of negotiating aura, because if you've got this whole giant regime change complex baked into your system, how are you going to sit down with Xi Jinping or Putin or anybody and have any type of durable, believable negotiation? You can't. So I think that there's a few aspects to it, but I don't think that, like, I have a lot of friends I have a show on a QAnon channel, and I'm the only person who doesn't believe in QAnon, but that's okay, because I also believe that good people also conspire to do good things as well as bad people conspire to do bad things. So we speak a common language in many ways. And from that standpoint, I don't have a positively heroic vision. I don't think that Trump is like the great, brilliant, grand strategist genius. And I don't think that the oligarchy that sort of brokered a deal with him, and specifically here I'm speaking about the Silicon Valley transhumanists, I don't think that they're good at all. I think they're evil, but I think they're being forced by the higher force of destiny to abide by or adapt to a new protocol for a period at least, and maybe that'll involve unleashing the chains of creativity to allow for industrial progress for the first time in so long. And in that sense, if they grow continental strategy, if Trump and whatever patriots might be around that want to have peaceful relations with Russia and China are able to stay in charge of that, that's good. If they're doing it in order to have an Iron Dome and to prepare for a more a different kind of command and control in preparation for a war with Russia and China and Iran, as like the Marco Rubio types might be inclined to push towards, or like even Elon Musk, who I don't trust. Like I think he took pride in his participation in carrying out regime change in South American nations. His Starlinks are tied to the military industrial complex. There's hundreds that he infused into Iran to help destabilize the Iranians.
You know what I recently found out from Drago? Yeah. That the reason that the Starlink satellites have been falling from the sky in premature schedules is because they've been burnt out of the sky by the Russians, because the Russians have apparently anti-satellite lasers that they triangulate forces in 404, also known as Ukraine.
Are you serious? The Russians have been taking out Starlink satellites? Seriously?
Yes, this is Drago. Drago actually told me, but they don't take it out; they just burn its sensors, which is why the Starlink satellites are being taken out of orbit and out of service before they were supposed to, like they're supposed to have a life cycle of 5 years or 7 years, I don't know, but some of the old ones are being taken out of orbit like 3 years in, and it's because of they need updates.
Really?
But Drago just pointed out in the previous recording that the Russians actually have lasers that are burning these satellites. So yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad to see that. I hope that's true.
You're very not like America. You don't have the American spirit. You just don't have it. I don't see the MAGA in you, man. I can see Xoaquin boiling in his skin he's disappointed in your non-MAGA-ness. What kind of future freedom-loving American can you be with such an attitude towards Musk?
I'm livid. I'm boiling, yeah.
Seriously speaking, though, we were discussing, all kinds of weird people and things. So I wanted to play this and get your guys' take on this.
The Trump is the best thing happened ever to us. That he is the magician of the highest order. That he is there in his irrational mind to create confusion in order that the human being can find new order. And it's not so stupid thinking about this in that way. It's completely turning things upside down. Because since Trump is around, things are changing. Because we are waking up.
All right. So Trump is the MAGA magician.
Yeah, I like this one. This is like the Soros interview part 2. It was like they asked them, like, tell us something about yourselves, and it's like, then you get Soros and he's like, I'm a narcissist megalomaniac that wants to shape the world around my image. That's Soros, right? And then Marina Abramovich is like, I'm a dark magician that's going to turn the world upside down, right? Projection. I mean, it's just very funny. It wasn't Soros that said that Trump was a dark magician, and it wasn't Abramovich that said that Trump was a narcissist trying to, impart his vision into the world, right? So very interesting.
Okay, so Matt, we've got the Q priest explanation. Now tell us the non-Q conspiracy theorist.
I'm open to a variety of possibilities, and I think that on the one hand, Joaquin could very well be right. Like, she's an occultist who definitely has been aching for seeing the world go through a mass invocation to usher in a new age. Like, these guys think in terms of ages, right? They don't think in terms of cycles of decades or centuries. Even they are wired to think in terms of ages, millennial ages. So like 1,000-year hikes. That's how they're wired mentally to think. So Marina, I see her as part of that. And it's very likely that she could feel a crisis, that things aren't working out accordingly, and she's trying to come up with a spin to try to, it's try to see the silver lining, or in this case, try to smell the sulfur. If you see the sulfur not dissipating, you're like, let's try to spin this so I can keep smelling my sulfur. So maybe that's true. She could be externalizing or projecting. To say like, yeah, everything is working out according to plan. Maybe that's it. And for me, I'm like, I tend to have I don't know I don't have a conclusion on where I stand with Trump. I don't I have seen evidence that shows me on a spectrum of 1 to 10 that he either is a really solid grand strategist playing a really solid game with probably a network he must have of very solid, sophisticated people that he must be working with, and back channels with Russia, China, and other Saudi Arabia, with other intelligentsia that are able to play, again, a very sophisticated long form game. Or he's a utilitarian, egotistical fool, but a patriot, somewhere in the middle, where he's like a good guy who definitely, like a Reagan type, wants to cut deals, doesn't think too far ahead, but overall non-predictable or less predictable because of his human sort of street smarts. In that case, there's still something good to be worked with, because that would imply that his instincts are still good, and bad people might want to use and influence him to achieve bad ends, but his orientation is still towards the good. That's still useful. And then on the other hand, yeah, maybe, I'm open to the possibility. It's not proven wrong to me that he's actually a self-aware, long form participant in some Apollonian figure ushering in some Caesar Octavio Augustus type of new reset of civilization with the occult transhumanists that have sort of centered themselves around the Silicon Valley hub. Possibly, I don't know. That would imply more that Marina would be touching on something true there. That would be tied to the Greater Israel, Solomon Temple revival cult thing to initiate some new age. That's possible. I don't necessarily believe that last cynical one, but again, it's not proven to me that it's wrong. I'm more vectoring around that number 2, leaning towards number 1. What I'm I'm in hypothesis formation mode, and I got to just see, what actually happens to sort of feed back into my considerations on this.
To give credence to Xoaquin's interpretation, which does, always bear fruit, that Trump always speaks in dualities, and his statements often get interpreted by the people interpreting them in the ways that they want to interpret them. So to outline that, we've got this version of Trump that's making the rounds. We've got which I have affectionately named the MHGA, MHGA. Make Hamas great again. And we've got the other version of Trump, which is the MIGA, make Israel great again. And I can see Xoaquin's already laughing. Why don't you tell us, Xoaquin, what you're giggling about?
Yeah, I mean, people are accusing him of both on both sides, so it's he's doing something with that. But I mean, you're talking about like Trump's motives and all this stuff, and like psychoanalyzing him or what, it's like my take is that he has a lot of energy, and he has a lot of thoughts, and he's been interested, he's just a person, there are people that are chill, and then there are people that are always trying to fucking do something. And he's someone that's always just trying to do something, and being born, inheriting $146 million or whatever, back when that was a lot of money, though. I mean, a lot of money. And, it's hard to, it's easy to invest if you're not living day to day and putting in 9 hours somewhere, and you can safely lose $1 million or 10 million. Maybe it's not hard to invest and make money, but there's a lot of people who inherit $150 million and they squander it, or they keep it, or they grow it a little bit. So he's a highly active person. He's just engaged. He's a high energy person, and he is older. That comes with wisdom. There's also biases. There's accrued experiences and things that won't work and do work. And then there's, frame of mind that if there are things that could work, you might not be aware or tuned into it, if it was a generational issue or conceptual one. But I don't think that new ideas are by virtue good ones. And, it's questionable what new ideas are really new. Seems like there's a lot of old ideas, and there's ones that work and ones that don't. But everything's been tried under the sun. So I think when you think about like Trump's motivations, it's like I don't see him needing any of this or requiring any of this. I don't see Trump as being beholden to anyone or any other force than the one that he's been building. And it's not an absolute force. It's not a total force, but he's been building a strong force for some time, more than a decade politically. I mean, you read Art of the Deal. I mean, the first chapter is about brokering political election deals in New York. I mean, it's his involvement in politics is not new or tangential to business. It's always been about that relationship between the nexus between the corporate and government spheres. So, history in modernity has like fused and coordinated those spheres in different ways. And sometimes those are more productive and sometimes they're less productive. There are ideas of the age. There are ideas. Sometimes there's bad ideas in an age or in a milieu, and sometimes there's good ones. And structural similarities or the class composure of the actors involved is not enough information. Like, in other words, to think that all you need to know is that they're an oligarchy or that they have money and power, and okay, that's all I need to know. That's going to tell you a lot. Don't get me wrong. It's going to tell you a lot, but we have to break out of this kind of Marxian paradigm that dictates that people with power and wealth are necessarily going to make the wrong decisions. They often make the wrong decisions, and without there being like a social political communication, feedback loop that goes all the way back to power, you're going to get very bad outcomes. So you need a dynamic, you need a vigilant population, you need activism, you need grassroots pressure. But I don't see, and I agree with Matt, I don't see inherently Trump as necessarily being tied to, or that it's determinable that he's tied to a particular agenda. And by the way, this is not a question of a shortcoming of analysis. This is not an analytic issue. We're talking about human beings that are intentionally creating these questions. So they are designed questions. We're not looking at a rock and trying to figure out some hard problem in physics. These are things where deception and keeping things from people is part of the equation. So if you're looking at one phenomenon and you're saying it could go this way, it could go that way, it could go a third and a fourth way, well, that's precisely how people engaged in at the highest level of power in negotiating and dealing with these, Trump's proposals, for example, right? They're interpreting it at that level, the level of it could go different ways. So if it was discernible, then it would be strategically a kind of dumb. I mean, if it was really discernible which way it was going to go necessarily, then
you're trying to say
around that. You wouldn't
you're
have
trying
any
to say
advantage.
Playing poker with your cards turned the other way is counterproductive.
That, right? How dumb is that? Right?
So double bluffing is the way to go. You shared this, Xoaquin, the other day by Inessa, friend of yours. And I wanted to get Matt's take on it as well. Let me zoom in all the way because I see you bending forward. It says China there. Do nothing, win. We've got America. Spend $8 trillion on the war of terror. Ignore international law. Destroy the Middle East. Support Nazis in Ukraine. Kill 1 million people. Blame everything on China. And then they lose. But it also says...
That's pretty brilliant.
It also says in the write-up, I'll send it to you later if you want. It also says in the write-up, China has also lifted 800 million out of poverty in the last 40 years. Over the past 8 years, China lifted approximately 10 million people, roughly the size of the entire population of Sweden, out of poverty each year. Not altogether over those years. Is the West doing things in reverse? And I immediately wanted to get your take on that, Matt, because you're, a little pro-China being, romantically involved, slightly. What was I going to say? But yeah, what's your take on China's way of doing things?
I'm going to let Matt take that. I'm going to handle this.
Yeah.
Get a refill of coffee. Yeah. Well, I am partial. I got a sweet spot for China. It's true. But it's not just through my wife. It's China's earned it. I just look at what China has been able to do as far as beat back this deep state like this infiltration, which was huge in the 80s and 90s, especially the 80s. The infiltration of this foreign-directed deep state complex within China was massive. George Soros had one of his key operatives installed as the top, the top guy, the Secretary General.
This goes back to the Tiananmen Square thing, right?
Yeah. So that was Zhao Ziyang, who was the Secretary General of the Chinese Communist Party, who managed a hedge fund with Soros. His key guy was a Soros asset who ran a hedge fund with him. So this was behind with USAID, NED, and especially Soros's operations. That was what was behind the color revolutionary attempt to overthrow the entire government apparatus and install their own Gorbachev. I mean, Zhao Ziyang was called the Gorbachev of China, and they wanted to install him as the mass privatizer to do their own Chinese perestroika. And unlike Russia, which was a little bit weaker on the uptake, a little bit slower on the uptake and weaker in general, China was able to get their wits to take down the whole Soros apparatus very effectively. They jailed Zhao Ziyang under house arrest, where he rotted and died 16 years later. And those who didn't get arrested, they got the assistance of the CIA through Hong Kong triads to escape into the US, where they were given sanctuary to build up what I think is today the whole Falun Gong apparatus to serve as sort of like a physiologically Chinese regime change government to prepare the groundwork for an eventual takeover. And they haven't been able to maintain their assets inside of China. China's done a huge takedown. And like that post pointed out, they've unleashed national development and a strong cultural warfare that's defended their ancient civilizational heritage of Buddhism, Confucianism, in a very strong, rigorous manner in their media, their music, their TV. My wife watches a lot of TV, like Chinese TV shows. And every time I sit down and I watch them, it's like nothing I can get in the West. They're all based upon like the moral and cultural education of the citizens to become better people and to become more insightful. A lot of the shows that are often period pieces from the Tang Dynasty or the Han Dynasty deal with historical lessons on how good people failed to take on responsibilities and resulted in tragedy, to give people a sense of how not to do this and how to understand foreign influences, court intrigue, and Machiavellian sort of operations. A lot of this is embedded into their stories for mass consumption. On top of just a high quality education, kids who are like in grade 5 are outpacing engineers taught in the University of Waterloo in Ontario, because the quality, how they're taught to think, it's a different paradigm. They're thinking about constructive geometry, creativity. They're infusing classical music with constructive geometry. Right?
It's the story of the open AI versus the whale. What's it called? The new Chinese AI?
But yeah, I forgot the name of the yeah, that's right. I'm blanking on it, but you're right. It's the same. It's the gist. It's just that any type of society that would encourage that quality of cognitive excellence to be promoted amongst their population is doing something which is anti-oligarchical. It's not compatible with the oligarchical system of controls that cannot permit the deeper creative powers of humanity to become realizable or actualized within the individual. They can't do it. Otherwise, we become disruptive. We make disruptive discoveries into the laws of nature that makes it more difficult to control us. That gives us more pride, more dignity, and less willingness to adapt to control systems of scarcity. So yeah, they've walked the walk, and so they've like really earned my admiration on many levels. And so yeah, I love those cartoons. Those are great cartoons.
DeepSeek is the other AI. I remembered it in the meantime.
Yeah.
Right. It was funny how that is the open source one that's let out to the people in the true communist way, whereas the open AI is not the open one. Not to mention it was hilarious watching the whole market collapse. I also wanted to get your take on this. We'll get Xoaquin's take. Well, we know his take, but because this is his post, but we'll get his input when he gets back to us. The Roman salute, myth or did it exist?
I thought it was a thing. I don't know. Was it a myth?
I don't know. From what I've been shown by some people, including that one guy whose show you've been on. I'll send you a link. I think it's a myth. I think it's a story that's been told. The Romans never used it. Basically, is what I've been told.
What does it change? Like, what does that matter? I guess.
I don't know, but all I'm saying is Musk is like liability.
Oh, okay.
like that was not a Roman salute. That's all I'm saying.
Well, what was that? Was that cartoon that was going around of like it was like a gradient of like different angular angles and like what's acceptable and what's not, and it's like one is like hail a cab, the other one is like
And
pet a child, and the other one in
yeah,
the middle there's like this red zone of
yeah.
of
Don't do this in
salute.
Germany.
Yeah, yeah.
That's basically it. I'll leave that maybe for later. What else have I got here now that we've got missing member of this talk? Hold on. Where is my tab with all of these other books that you've gotten articles here? Plus TV. New film release, The Hidden Hand Behind UFOs, Episode 3. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, it's the newest of the film series. There's going to be probably 8 or 9 episodes when it's done, as like a whole series is concerned. And as I mentioned, I'm working on episode 4 right now, on the hoax of Roswell. But basically, this whole series was written because I kind of got the sense that the broader game plan, the top sort of obsession by the oligarchy is to restore the ancient pagan mystery cults of the pre-Christian era. But since they can't just erase all of the traditional religions, like, Islam and Judaism and Christianity, they can't just erase that. What they're trying to do is rebrand it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the last century, a game plan was generated by followers of Edward Bulwer Lytton, that included Thomas Huxley's student, H.G. Wells, to come up with scenarios to unite the world together around the threat of aliens, which either want to save us or kill us. There's variations on the theme. And there's been a big obsession to use the alien thing under the context of a cataclysmic breakdown of the system, like a controlled demolition, to create a new restoration of a mass, like new set of sacred myths about humanity's origins that pertain to ETs that we can interface with through psychedelic drugs, transcendental meditation practices, other things that the elite has known since ancient times, as far as the different stories have been woven together that have given us, technologies like the atomic power and the pyramids and everything. And so that's what a lot of this stuff is, as far as I could see. That's what's behind the Stephen Greer, the David Icke, the Disclosure Initiative. That's really, really influential right now. And I see that also as a danger. I don't think he's aware of this, although his son, Donald Trump Jr., is a big ideological promoter of UFOs. So they're preparing the groundwork for a big disclosure, which is going to involve forged documents pertaining to files about UFOs, a lot of CGI, probably some holographic material like we've seen with Bluebeam, or you've seen that with the holograms of Jesus floating in the skies above Brazil. You guys have probably seen that, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'm almost sure that the reason they need Greenland is so that they can fake Mars, because that's the only way they're going to get to Mars is if they take Greenland. You've seen that movie. You've seen that movie where they fake the Mars landing.
Where they fake
Mars landing. I think it's called Capricorn. Capricorn 1, I think it's called.
Yeah, that was it.
That's an excellent movie. Well worth the watch.
Okay, I'll watch it.
Well worth the watch. Xoaquin, while you were gone, before we got into aliens and demon cults and new pagan alien religions, we also popped up the whole Roman salute thing, and I wouldn't want to not get your take on it. What is the Roman salute, and did it exist? Do you think it's a myth, or do you think it's real? Because apparently, from what I've seen, it's a myth, and it didn't exist.
Did the Roman salute exist? The earliest references that I can find to a Roman salute depiction in art dates back to the 19th century to artists that were in the universe or within and adjacent to what's often called the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, which is not before Raphael. They're just talking about the style of art, and and they were the ones that. This is in the age of J.R.R. This is the formative stuff that gives life to the world of like J.R.R. Tolkien and stuff like this. This is where you get these different ideas about the ancient times, and you get a lot of lore and fantasy mixed in with that. And there was a big fascination with the medieval times and ancient Greece and Rome. And so you see that as like, and sometimes ancient Egypt through a kind of Hellenic lens. And you see that in this milieu that, I mean, loosely you would call pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood plus, or, it was more than just those guys. But most of those people would go on in the 20th century to become graphic designers that were the ones that gave birth to like all of the like Playboy magazines and like the magazines that had like drawings of girls. Like you would see, like sometimes you see like in a World War II movie, a guy has like a magazine if it's like a drawing of a girl or something. There's like Gil Elfgren and Vargas and people like this. So in the night, they were older in the 40s and 50s when they were illustrating, but their technique and their style and the milieu they come out of is this art of medieval and antiquity work. So the Roman salute comes from this work, but it was there was a movement in the United States that also in the 19th century of around the ideas of, or contributed idea maker was Bellamy, and he wrote a book called Looking Back. And, he was a American 19th century progressive, like you would call him like a right-wing socialist of the 19th century. He was a certain type of progressive. And a lot of the ideas are very, they line up with its English counterpart that Matt has developed a lot of, the Fabian Society. And some of these people later, you would see like a kind of reboot of this in the technocracy movement a little bit. But it was Bellamy Looking Back, and this was connected to the movement to introduce the Pledge of Allegiance in the United States. As we have this new system at the time of public schools, public elementary schools and like the little red schoolhouse and stuff, you have an American flag next to the chalkboard. Sometimes a picture of George Washington and the present president. And every morning the kids put their right hand over their heart, and then they would go, ready, begin, and like this, and they would say, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, yada, yada, yada. So that appears to be one of the, earlier representations. But you see, there's a broader problem is that most of our conception of antiquity comes from the artistic imagination of the 19th century anyhow. So it's not an error of the type. It's not an error in approved method, I should say, to derive from 19th century ideas what ancient Rome, what was happening and what it was about. Because all of our other half-baked ideas about the time also come from the 19th century. So I think on the one hand, you could say the Roman salute is considered part of the accepted canon of like lore of ancient Rome, based upon many other things that we think about how things looked and what shit was about. So, but in actuality, it's probably only a couple hundred years old. And I think it was probably the different fascist movements in Italy at also the end of the 19th century and early 20th century. You had the nationalists and socialists and progressives after the time of Garibaldi and onwards, they began to develop from after the red shirts, from after them you had the Roman salute among these different fascist groups. So antiquarianism, is kind of like the idea, but it's interesting that a lot of these Italian ideas from the early 20th century about what ancient Rome was are handed to them by the Smithsonian Institute, right, and the British. So there's just so many, there's so many layers, to unwrap. But yeah, it's a very good question. I think Elon Musk, wanted to give his love to everyone, and I think that's just what he was just like that,
I was just looking at this online because I know the name Bellamy from, like, I just had to do a lot of this work for my last book, so I was just pulling up some of my old notes. And yeah, like, this guy's a complete through and through theosophist. He's actually directly friends with Blavatsky, who's endorsing his looking backwards. Yeah. And he's innovating National Socialism, right? The whole swastika thing that Blavatsky's popularizing, the sixth root race stuff, and the idea of like a Fabian national, like, social imperialism, or like, it's social imperialism. That's what Fabianism is.
Wait.
And they had this like national version of it. That he's directly,
be the perfect people to
innovating.
Ask. You might be the perfect people to ask. Tell me about Musk's mother in relation to what you were just discussing now.
I don't know. I don't know how that fits.
Musk's mother is has deep commitments in theosophic, like, structurally, not just New Age, but structurally theosophic ideas, and and its relationship to the occult and seances and mediumship, seances, the occult, and theosophy. Yeah, Elon Musk's mother, they're kind of the same, cut from the same cloth, as they say, if you will, as Anderson Cooper's mother and the Vanderbilt. So. You have this kind of like weird, they're Dutch, both the Vanderbilts and the Musks. You have this weird theosophic stuff arising in the popularized and the upper middle class and above, but really like the lower rich and everyone up. It was very popular in the late 19th century, the seance movement, the occult, necromancy. I mean, think about the time. You had the Victorian period, the Edwardian period. You have a lot of dark coats. It's like everyone dressed everywhere like they were going to a fucking funeral. I call it the funeral society. I mean, there's something just so morbid about that time and their view of the world and their view of life. There's great movies that kind of capture some of that. Like there's a horror ghost movie, Nicole Kidman movie called The Others. And it's a great
excellent
movie. Capturing, taking pictures of dead people, like a portrait, like a death portrait and shit like that, and fucking creepy. So that's all built in there. But it's like this is all breakaway civilization stuff. This is all breakaway civilization stuff because they're rejecting the Christian ethic of Western, so they're breaking that down, right? And they make a very interesting analysis of it in terms of relativizing it or subjecting it to critique. And in many ways, they see themselves as like the rebels, or they see themselves as like breaking down the walls of a putrid system, and that they're leading the way. And to try to put yourself in their shoes and their time in the place, I mean, like, for sure, like the Catholic Church of the 18th and 19th century in the West, and was, look, I'm not an expert on the structural deficiencies of the church or every single scandal, and forgive me for any prejudice and biases, okay, but just from my perspective, I think it suffices to say that, like, the corruption in the Catholic Church, or the way that people interpreted the hypocrisy of the church in relationship to leaders and the powerful and the rich, and purchasing indulgences and kind of a whole structure based upon this purchase of indulgences. I think many people were responding to that. I mean, they could see that. So you could see how theosophic ideas in the age would be attractive to people, because there's some elements of, there's a religion in there, there's elements, there's some spiritual and religious theological questions are addressed, but it's also kind of appealing to the ego, like, of that, you know, it's a very, very mixed bag, but it appeals to curiosity, but it also appeals to common sense ideas of the time. So, but it also appeals, unfortunately, because people are complex, it can appeal to a lot of different things. And look, if you're a poor person and you come across theosophic ideas, it might cause you to challenge doctrines in the church, or to think about power structures and long-term planning of elites in a certain way. You don't even have to subscribe to the full of those ideas. You could just be exposed to them. You can, you know, a lot of people would appropriate for themselves a lot of things of theosophic ideas, which is why you have such a lot of New Age thinking within populist movements, right? And even New Age conspiracies within populist movements. But when you talk about like the ruling class and the upper echelons of society, like they interpret themselves as the body of agency to implement. So this takes on a very different dynamic than, you know, than people who just kind of get exposed to ideas. They see themselves, they become like the high priests and shit, you know.
I've gotta interject. I want to circle back to Maria Abramovich, but before I do that, I want to add, because I know that it's early morning where you're at, because it's early morning where I'm at, but it's very late where Matt's at. So I want to ask Matt how you're doing with time, because we've got an hour and 10 minutes into this, and we can break it up now and then do like another 40-minute session, or we can do another 20 minutes or so and then call it a day. How do you feel? It's up to you, Matt.
No, I'm okay. Yeah, let's keep pushing it. I don't mind. I'm not feeling tired.
All right, let's then circle back to Maria Abramovich, because we're talking about all these evil people and their influence in society. And I just wanted to pop this up there in the background. This is the right hand of one of the student protest movements, and she has been exposed as having fun hobbies, depicting stuff that should probably be censored on YouTube with her favorite artist, Abramovich. So I just wanted to put that out there for people to see and to get your guys' take on how these ideas and societal influences from way on up have permeated all the way down to student protests, thanks to NED and USAID.
Remember that concert where Lady Gaga hired a professional vomit artist who would bring some concoction of like some green filament and then vomit all over herself on stage while the concert was playing? And she like took her on tour. Art. Yeah, no, it's on YouTube. There's actually like professional vomit artists, and they would like dance, you know, and then just vomit, and they'd stick their and it would be like hyper green as well. But yeah, I think, I mean, I'm sort of speechless seeing some of the disgusting horror show called art that Marina is passing off, and how that's being infused into student activism is just it's a sign that there's something in our society that's not fit to survive morally. Other than that, I don't know how to just specifically what I just saw there. What do you think, Joaquin?
Yeah, man, we had a system in the past where there was a order of things, and over time, over the centuries, it became ossified and corrupt. And the 19th and 20th centuries, you know, really beginning with the middle 18th century, but the last couple hundred years have been really crazy because the critics have been in power, and with the critics in power, they continually use the strategy that got them into power hundreds of years ago, which is to attack this old order of things. The old order of things, though, is a mixed bag, like we said. So, you know, when the anti-art movement, or the anything that an artist makes as art movement, or, you know, the Dadaism, the Cacophony Society, the modern art, you know, so many. This is like a giant shit test for humanity, of course, on the one hand, but it really speaks to what happens when you have the critics in power. Like, we have the system of critics is the system that we have in power, and they can only deconstruct. And anything that they propose as good is simply a corruption or an inversion of what the old order nominally represented. There's no forward agenda that they've ever presented that humanity could build on. So, Marina Abramović, the student protests in Serbia, and this connection that was revealed with one of the main organizers, one of the people that sit on the bureau of the student leaders, no one elected. Their ties to a cult and the weird shit they do in their spare time. These people are identified, they're attracted to it, they're groomed. I think I was a punk rocker at one point in my life. I kind of understand the rebellious mindset for a person in their teens or 20s to have, but it's
okay.
Like, you know.
We'll get to your stories of Rurik in the second half. I'm gonna have to call this the first half of this talk. I'm gonna play some music in the background here. I'm gonna thank both of you. Matt, thank you. XF, thanks as always. Everyone, like, share, subscribe. I'm not going to tell you what to do. The links are in the description. You'll find links to everything that these two have to offer and everything that can lead you to supporting me. All right, that's it for now. We'll be back soon. Peace.